Imagine a world where simplicity is treated as a flaw, where honesty is mistaken for ignorance, where living quietly with moral integrity feels like a threat, not a virtue. Think about it. Why does a system that claims to reward hard work, intelligence, and freedom seem to push away those who live simply, speak plainly, and refuse to worship power, money, or status? Imagine waking up every day without the hunger to impress, without the fear of falling behind, without the need to prove your worth. For many, this sounds like peace. For the system, it sounds like danger. Today, we begin uncovering a truth Leo Tolstoy understood long before modern psychology named it. Systems don't fear chaos as much as they fear simplicity. And the final revelation we'll reach, it's the most powerful of all. Simplicity itself becomes a quiet, radical form of resistance. Tolstoy didn't write from theory, he lived it. Born into privilege, surrounded by wealth and prestige, he stood at the center of the system. Yet the closer he got to power, the clearer its emptiness became. He saw how institutions reward ambition over conscience, obedience over truth, appearance over substance. Instead of climbing higher, he stripped his life down to essentials. For Tolstoy, simplicity wasn't a trend or aesthetic. It was a moral position. A simple person, in his view, aligns their life with inner truth, not external reward. This kind of person becomes deeply unsettling to any structure built on illusion, because systems survive by convincing people that meaning comes from outside. Titles, success, productivity, recognition. A simple person quietly refuses that bargain. Before we go further, pause. If this resonates, subscribe, like, share this with someone who feels out of place in the modern world, and leave a comment. What we're unfolding here has the potential to change how you see success, society, and your own quiet strength. The system doesn't openly attack simple people. It reframes them, calls them unambitious, naive, unrealistic, outdated. It teaches society to admire complexity and distrust clarity, because complexity hides what's artificial. A person who needs little cannot be easily controlled. One satisfied with enough cannot be endlessly manipulated. One guided by conscience doesn't need constant validation. Tolstoy knew complexity isn't always intelligence. Often it's camouflage. The more complex a system, the easier it hides injustice within procedures, rules, abstractions. Simple people cut through that fog. They ask basic questions that destabilize elaborate structures. Is this right? Is this necessary? Who benefits? That's where tension begins. Systems depend on people confusing accumulation with fulfillment. They train us to compete, compare, conform. Simple people refuse that script. They don't measure worth through consumption. They don't equate busyness with importance. They don't sacrifice inner peace for social approval. And because of that, they become unpredictable. Psychologically, this mirrors what Jung later warned. When you identify entirely with social roles, you become dependent on the system that grants those rewards. Simple people remain internally anchored. That anchor can't be easily threatened. Tolstoy believed true power is moral independence, not dominance, not control. A simple person possesses it without needing permission. They're harder to frighten, fewer attachments. Harder to seduce, not starving for validation. Harder to corrupt, values non-negotiable. Ask yourself, when was the last time you felt pressured to appear successful rather than feel whole? To be impressive rather than truthful? What happens inside you when you resist that, even quietly? The system thrives on noise, speed, motion. Simple people slow everything down. They pause. They reflect. And in that silence, uncomfortable truths emerge. Is this endless striving really progress? Is this life aligned with what matters? These questions are dangerous, not because they incite rebellion, but because they awaken awareness. Tolstoy knew awakened individuals can't be easily governed by illusion. That's why simplicity is never neutral. It becomes a mirror, held up to society, revealing contradictions no protest or speech ever could. And this is only the beginning. As we move forward, we'll uncover how simple people unintentionally threaten authority, why their presence exposes deep insecurities in the system, and how Tolstoy believed living simply wasn't an escape, but a confrontation with the world. Productivity becomes a moral value. Rest becomes laziness. Silence becomes weakness. Yet Viktor Frankl later emphasized, meaning doesn't come from constant activity, but from alignment with purpose. A simple person prioritizes meaning over motion. Have you noticed how uncomfortable people get when someone refuses to compete? When they're content without comparison, when they don't envy success or fear obscurity? That discomfort reveals a hidden insecurity. If fulfillment truly depended on achievement, simplicity would be impossible. Its existence exposes a lie many have built their lives upon. Tolstoy saw envy as one of the system's most powerful tools. By keeping people focused on what others have, society ensures perpetual dissatisfaction. Simple people step out of this cycle. They don't define themselves by relative position. This makes them hard to motivate through fear or greed. Systems rely heavily on both. There's also a moral courage required for simplicity, one rarely acknowledged. To live simply often means accepting misunderstanding, resisting trends, expectations, even family pressure. It can mean earning less admiration and more quiet judgment. Tolstoy understood this social cost is exactly what keeps many trapped in lives they don't believe in. The system subtly teaches that survival depends on constant adaptation. Be faster, be louder, be more visible. Simple people resist this narrative by staying rooted. They choose depth over breadth, integrity over image. This resistance isn't aggressive, but deeply destabilizing to structures built on endless escalation. Ask yourself honestly, how much of your daily effort is driven by fear of falling behind? How much of your identity is shaped by what you think you must become, rather than who you already are? And what would happen if you allowed yourself to need less? Tolstoy believed the greatest tragedy of modern life isn't suffering, but self-betrayal. When individuals repeatedly act against their conscience to survive within a system, they lose touch with their inner compass. Simple people preserve it. Even if they can't articulate it philosophically, they live it. That's why simplicity carries a quiet authority, not of command, but of coherence. Their words align with actions, their values with choices. This consistency is rare, and rarity attracts attention, sometimes admiration, sometimes hostility. As we go deeper, we confront an uncomfortable truth. The system doesn't just marginalize simple people. It depends on convincing everyone else that simplicity is impossible, that without constant striving, life collapses. Tolstoy saw through this illusion, and what he discovered next challenges the very definition of success and progress. He revealed that the system doesn't merely dislike simple people, it relies on everyone believing. Simplicity is naive, unrealistic, or irresponsible. This belief isn't natural, it's carefully cultivated, because once people realize a meaningful life requires far less than they were taught, the foundation of endless striving cracks. Tolstoy observed that modern society replaces moral questions with technical ones. Instead of asking, "Is this right?" people are encouraged to ask, "Is it efficient, profitable, socially acceptable?" This shift lets people distance themselves from consequences. Simple people resist this substitution. They return questions to their moral core, and that return is deeply disruptive. When morality is simplified, excuses lose power. When conscience is prioritized, justifications collapse. That's why systems prefer complexity. Complexity dilutes responsibility. People say, "I was only following procedures. I was fulfilling my role." Simple people cannot hide behind such abstractions. They act as if their choices matter, and that alone is threatening. Tolstoy believed most injustice persists not because people support it, but because they feel powerless within complexity. They feel too small to change anything. Simple people challenge this belief by showing ethical living doesn't require permission. One honest refusal, one quiet boundary, one life lived differently. These acts don't overthrow systems overnight, but they weaken the illusion that compliance is inevitable. From a psychological standpoint, this aligns with Hannah Arendt's idea of the normalization of harm through routine. When harmful actions become ordinary, people stop questioning them. Simple people interrupt this normalization. Their refusal to accept what everyone else accepts forces an uncomfortable reflection. If they can live this way, why am I not? This often provokes hostility, not because simple people are wrong, but because they awaken buried guilt. The system channels this discomfort by framing simplicity as irresponsibility. You're told, without ambition, you're wasting potential. Without competition, you're falling behind. Without accumulation, you're unsafe. These fears keep people obedient. Tolstoy saw that fear is the system's most reliable tool. Fear of poverty, fear of insignificance, fear of exclusion. Simple people weaken fear by needing less. When happiness doesn't depend on external approval, threats lose force. When identity isn't tied to status, humiliation loses its sting. This emotional independence is rare, and anything rare becomes suspicious. Have you ever noticed how society praises simplicity in theory but discourages it in practice? People admire it in books, quotes, distant figures, but hesitate to embrace it themselves. This contradiction reveals an inner conflict. Many sense that simplicity is true, yet feel unable to live it. The system survives in that gap between truth and action. Tolstoy warned, when people suppress their moral instincts long enough, they begin to rationalize their emptiness. They call it realism, maturity, how the world works. Simple people quietly expose these labels as disguises for surrender. There's also a deeper existential dimension. Simplicity forces us to confront meaning. If life isn't about endless achievement, what remains? Love, responsibility, presence, mortality. These aren't comfortable topics. The system keeps people busy to avoid them. Simple people face them directly. That's why Tolstoy linked simplicity to spiritual clarity, even outside religion. He believed that when distractions fall away, individuals encounter fundamental truths: suffering, compassion, responsibility. This encounter is transformative and destabilizing. A person who has faced these truths can't easily return to shallow pursuits. Ask yourself, when your schedule is quiet, when distractions fade, what thoughts arise? Peace or discomfort? And if discomfort appears, what is it asking you to see? The system provides endless noise to prevent these moments. Entertainment, urgency, constant updates. Simple people step out of this noise. Their silence becomes resistance, not loud enough to be punished, but clear enough to be felt. Tolstoy believed humanity's future depends not on smarter systems, but on clearer consciences. No political reform can compensate for moral confusion at the individual level. Simple people preserve moral clarity because they refuse to outsource their values. This is where the deepest threat lies. A system can adapt to protests, absorb criticism, rebrand endlessly. But it cannot easily absorb individuals who no longer need what it offers, who no longer believe its promises, who no longer fear its punishments. As we approach the final part, we'll uncover the most powerful insight. Not just why the system resists simple people, but how simplicity becomes a quiet force capable of reshaping how life is lived, understood, and valued. Tolstoy's most radical insight comes into view. The system doesn't hate simple people because they're weak. It resists them because they reveal a truth the system cannot survive if widely understood. Human beings do not need nearly as much as they are taught to live meaningful, dignified, fulfilled lives. Simplicity is not withdrawal from life. It's engagement at its most essential level. When excess and false ambition are stripped away, what remains is responsibility toward oneself, others, and truth. This responsibility cannot be delegated to institutions, ideologies, or roles. It must be carried personally, and that's why systems discourage it. A simple person no longer asks, "What can I gain?" They ask, "What is right?" This shift changes everything. When gain isn't the primary motivator, exploitation loses appeal. When comparison doesn't define worth, envy weakens. When status doesn't provide identity, fear collapses. The system depends on these forces to function smoothly. Tolstoy knew most people sense this truth intuitively, but suppress it, because acting on it requires difficult changes. Simplicity demands courage. Letting go of illusions that bring comfort, accepting uncertainty instead of false security, Above all, honesty about one's own life. The system teaches success equals expansion, more money, recognition, influence. Tolstoy proposed the opposite. Success lies in inner coherence. When actions align with conscience, a person experiences freedom no external reward can match. This freedom is invisible, which is why it's undervalued. But it's real. Historically, Tolstoy wasn't alone. Thinkers like Thoreau, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. understood that simplicity weakens unjust systems, not by force, but by non-participation. When enough people refuse to live by values they don't believe in, systems are forced to confront their emptiness. This doesn't mean abandoning society or rejecting structure. Tolstoy didn't advocate chaos. He advocated conscience. He believed that when individuals act ethically, society reorganizes naturally around truth, not coercion. The problem arises when people wait for systems to become moral before they do. Simple people reverse this logic. They live as if their choices matter. They refuse to hide behind excuses like, everyone does it, or that's just how things are. This refusal exposes a painful reality. Many systems continue not because they're necessary, but because individuals have psychologically abandoned responsibility to them. This is where simplicity becomes transformative. A person who lives simply regains authorship of their own life. They're no longer reacting to pressure, trends, or expectations. They act from intention. Viktor Frankl called this the last human freedom. The freedom to choose your attitude and actions regardless of circumstances. The system fears this freedom because it cannot regulate it. It cannot standardize conscience. It cannot automate meaning. Simple people embody something unscalable, uncontrollable, inner authority. That's why they're often isolated, misunderstood, dismissed. Yet quietly they endure. Ask yourself, if tomorrow you were no longer driven by fear of judgment, lack, or falling behind, how would your life change? What would you stop doing? What would you finally allow yourself to do? What values would rise once the noise faded? Tolstoy believed humanity stands at a crossroads. Between greater complexity and deeper clarity, systems will grow more intricate. But the choice is ours. To live in alignment with truth, or to be swept along by the tide of illusion. Technology will accelerate. Distraction will multiply. But the fundamental question remains unchanged. Will individuals live according to truth or convenience? Simplicity is not the easy path. It often brings fewer rewards, more solitude, but it brings something far more enduring: integrity, a life that makes sense from the inside. And when a life makes sense internally, it no longer needs external validation. The system doesn't know how to handle such people. It can buy ambition, threaten fear, seduce desire, but it cannot negotiate with conscience. That's why, in every era, simple people quietly shape humanity's moral future. Tolstoy understood this. He lived it. His message remains unsettling because it places responsibility where it belongs. Not in institutions, not in ideologies, but in the daily choices of ordinary individuals. In the end, simplicity isn't about having less. It's about needing less to be whole. And a person who is whole cannot be easily controlled. Thanks for watching.